The metallic click of a hammer being cocked echoed through the mountain pass, sending a flock of startled birds into the sky. Zara Dalton pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp autumn air of the Black Hills. 3 bounty hunters blocked her only escape route, their expressions as merciless as the wanted poster that had put a $500 price on her head for a crime she didn't commit. "End of the line, Miss Dalton," the lead hunter called, a tall man with a pockmarked face and dead eyes that had seen too much killing. "Judge Hollister is mighty interested in seeing you hang for what you did to his brother." Zara clutched her satchel tighter, her knuckles white with tension. "I told you I didn't kill anyone. I was framed," the second bounty hunter, a burly man with a thick beard, spat tobacco juice onto the rocky ground. "Save it for the judge, lady, though I don't reckon he'll be much for listening." The third hunter, thin and wiry with a nasty scar running down his cheek, grinned as he twirled his revolver. "We can do this easy or we can do this hard. Don't much matter to me dead or alive, that reward money spends the same." Zara's heart pounded against her ribs. There was nowhere to run. The steep walls of the mountain pass rose on either side, and the path behind her only led deeper into the wilderness, a dead end. Even if she could somehow slip past them, her horse had been shot out from under her miles back. "I ain't going to hang for something I didn't do," she declared, trying to keep her voice from trembling. The lead hunter shrugged. "Your choice." He raised his pistol, aiming squarely at her chest. The crack of a rifle shot split the air, but it hadn't come from any of the bounty hunters. The lead hunter's hat flew off his head as a bullet grazed it, sending him diving for cover behind a boulder. "Next one goes between your eyes," called a deep voice from above them, all eyes turned upward. Silhouetted against the bright Dakota sky stood a lone figure on the ridge above the pass, a Winchester rifle trained steadily on the hunters below. The sun glinted off the barrel as he shifted his aim between the 3 men. "Drop your weapons," commanded the stranger. "I don't miss twice." The lead hunter scowled, his hand still on his holstered pistol. "This ain't your business, mister. We're lawfully collecting a bounty." 3 men hunting down 1 woman don't seem too sporting to me," the stranger replied, his voice carrying a hint of southern drawl. "Now drop those guns before I ventilate you proper." Something in his tone, a calm certainty that promised death, convinced the hunters. Slowly, reluctantly, they unbuckled their gun belts and let them fall. "Miss," the stranger called down to Zara, "there's a narrow trail to your right, about 10 paces back. It'll bring you up here." Zara glanced to where he indicated and spotted the faint path she'd missed before. With one last look at her would-be captors, she darted toward it and began to climb, her heart still racing. The trail was steep and treacherous, loose rocks skittering away under her boots as she ascended. By the time she reached the top, her breath came in ragged gasps, and her hands were scraped raw from grabbing at rocks and roots. Her rescuer stood a few feet away, his rifle still trained on the hunters below. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn buckskin jacket over a faded blue shirt. A dusty black Stetson shadowed his features, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Much obliged for your help, mister," she said, brushing dirt from her skirt. He nodded without taking his eyes off the bounty hunters. "Name's Matthew Farley. You got someplace safe to go, Miss Dalton?" Zara startled. "How do you know my name?" A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Those wanted posters are all over the territory, though I got to say they don't do you justice." Before Zara could respond, a shot rang out from below. One of the hunters had pulled a hidden derringer and fired wildly up at them. Matthew returned fire in one fluid motion, and the hunter dropped his small pistol with a howl, clutching his bleeding hand. "Time we weren't here," Matthew said, grabbing Zara's arm and pulling her away from the edge. "My horse is just over the ridge. We can make Hill City by nightfall if we ride hard." "Why are you helping me?" Zara asked as they hurried across the rocky plateau. "Let's just say I've got my reasons to believe those posters are lying." He whistled sharply, and a magnificent black stallion trotted into view from behind a stand of pines. Besides, 3 against 1 ain't fair odds, no matter what the crime. As they mounted, Zara sitting behind Matthew and wrapping her arms around his waist, she heard shouts from the bounty hunters who were now scrambling to find a way up the cliff. "They won't give up easy," she warned. Matthew urged his horse forward, the animal responding instantly to his touch. "Neither will we," he replied as they galloped away from the pass, the wind whipping through Zara's long auburn hair. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as they rode, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape of the Black Hills. The year was 1878, and this wild territory still held more secrets than settlements. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following game trails and creek beds to throw off any pursuit. Matthew handled the stallion with expert skill, navigating terrain that would challenge even the most seasoned rider. Finally, when the horse needed rest, they stopped in a small clearing beside a bubbling stream. Matthew dismounted first, then offered Zara his hand. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. She took a step back, still wary despite his help. "You still haven't told me why you believe I'm innocent." Matthew led his horse to the stream, letting the animal drink. "I've been tracking Judge Hollister and his dealings for some time now. You're not the first person he's tried to railroad. You're not a bounty hunter yourself, are you?" Zara asked, eyeing the rifle he'd slung across his back. He shook his head. "Used to ride with the Texas Rangers. Now I work for the Pinkerton agency. Been investigating Hollister for 6 months." "A Pinkerton?" Zara's eyes widened. The famous detective agency was known throughout the West. "Then you know I didn't kill his brother." "I know Samuel Hollister was planning to testify against the judge for land fraud when he turned up dead." Matthew filled his canteen from the stream. "And I know you worked as his housekeeper and supposedly found the body." Zara's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the canteen he offered. "I did find him, shot in his study. The judge showed up minutes later with the sheriff, claimed I did it for the money in his safe." She took a long drink of the cool water. "They found blood on my hands, of course there was blood, I tried to help him. And $500 in my room that I'd never seen before." Matthew nodded. "The judge controls the sheriff, the prosecutor, and half the jury pool in that county. You didn't stand a chance at a fair trial, so you ran." "Wouldn't you?" Zara challenged. "Can't say I blame you." Matthew checked his pocket watch. "We should get moving. Hill City's still a good ride away, and I've got a friend there who can help us." As they remounted, Zara couldn't help but notice the easy grace with which Matthew moved, the quiet confidence in his actions. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. The terrain grew more challenging as they rode, with steep slopes and dense stands of ponderosa pines that blocked the fading sunlight. The air grew colder as evening approached, and Zara found herself pressing closer to Matthew's back for warmth. "What's in Hill City?" she asked, raising her voice against the wind. "An old friend who runs the newspaper there. He's been gathering evidence against Hollister, too. Between what he has and what I've collected, we might have enough to clear your name and bring the judge down." "And if we don't?" Matthew was silent for a moment. "Then we keep riding. I hear Canada's nice this time of year." The unexpected humor in his voice made Zara smile despite their situation. "I never thought I'd be an outlaw. My pa raised me to respect the law." "There's law and there's justice," Matthew replied. "Sometimes they ain't the same thing." As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Matthew kept them moving, navigating by starlight with an unerring sense of direction that impressed Zara. "How much farther?" she asked after they'd crossed a shallow river, the water splashing up to dampen her skirts. "Not far now. See those lights ahead?" Zara peered over his shoulder and could just make out pinpricks of light in the distance, nestled in a valley between the hills. "That's Hill City. Small but growing since they found gold in these hills. My friend Morris runs the Hill City Herald. We'll be safe there for tonight." As they approached the outskirts of town, Matthew slowed their pace to a walk, taking less traveled side streets. Hill City was small, just a few dozen buildings lining a main street, with scattered cabins and tents spreading outward. Despite the late hour, the saloon was still brightly lit. piano music and raucous laughter spilling out into the night. Matthew guided his horse to a modest two-story building with a sign identifying it as the office of the Hill City Herald. A light still burned in the upstairs window. "Wait here," Matthew instructed, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. He rapped a specific pattern on the back door, 3 quick knocks, then 2 slow ones. After a moment, the door cracked open and a thin man with spectacles peered out. "Matt, what in tarnation are you doing here this time of night? Need your help, Morris." "Got a lady friend with me who's in some trouble." Morris glanced past Matthew to where Zara sat on the horse. His eyes widened in recognition. "That's the Dalton woman, ain't it? The one from the posters. She's innocent and I can prove it, but we need a place to lay low while I sort things out." Morris hesitated, then sighed. "You always did have a knack for finding trouble." He opened the door wider. "Bring her in, quick, before someone sees." Matthew helped Zara down from the horse and led her inside. The back room of the newspaper office was cluttered with stacks of paper, barrels of ink, and various printing tools Zara didn't recognize. Morris locked the door behind them and lit another lamp. In the improved light, Zara could see he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his 50s, with thinning gray hair and a newspaperman's ink-stained fingers. "Morris Peterson, this is Zara Dalton," Matthew made the introduction. "Morris and I go back to the war." He was an army correspondent. "Madam," Morris nodded politely but kept his distance, still eyeing her warily. "You look like you've had a rough go of it." Zara became suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance, her dress torn and dirty from days on the run, her hair tangled and windblown. "It hasn't been the most pleasant few weeks," she admitted. "Morris has been helping me gather evidence on Judge Hollister," Matthew explained. "He's been publishing stories about suspicious land deals, though he has to be careful about naming names." "The judge has long arms," Morris agreed. "Tried to buy my paper last month through a proxy. When I refused, there was a mysterious fire in my storage shed." He adjusted his spectacles. "I've been sleeping with a shotgun ever since." "What have you found?" Zara asked. Morris moved to a large oak filing cabinet and extracted a thick folder. "Land records, witness statements, bank transfers. The judge has been forcing people off their land when gold is discovered, then reselling the claims to mining companies for a hefty profit." Matthew took the folder, quickly scanning its contents. His brother Samuel was his bookkeeper. "Must have grown a conscience. And now I'm blamed for his murder," Zara said bitterly. Morris nodded. "Convenient for the judge, wasn't it? Gets rid of his whistleblowing brother and finds a perfect scapegoat in one move. Is there enough here to prove the judge killed his own brother?" Matthew asked. Morris shook his head. "Not directly, but combined with what you've gathered, it might be enough to get the federal marshal involved." "The nearest federal marshal is in Deadwood," Matthew said, thinking out loud. 2 days' ride from here." "You can't go tonight," Morris insisted. "There's rooms upstairs. Get some rest, and I'll have fresh horses ready for you in the morning." Zara felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept in a real bed. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Just Morris, please," he smiled kindly. "Any friend of Matt's is a friend of mine, even ones with bounties on their heads." Morris showed them upstairs to 2 small but clean rooms above the newspaper office. There was a wash basin with fresh water in each, and Zara nearly wept at the sight. "I'll see if I can find you some clean clothes," Morris told her. "Can't have you riding around looking like that. Might as well wear that wanted poster as a dress." After Morris left, Matthew lingered in the doorway of Zara's room. "Try to get some sleep. We'll leave at first light." Zara nodded, then impulsively caught his hand. "Thank you for believing me, for helping me." His fingers tightened briefly around hers, the touch sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Get some rest, Miss Dalton." "Zara," she corrected. "If we're going to be running for our lives together, you might as well use my first name." A smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face. "Zara, then. Good night." After he'd gone, Zara poured water into the basin and washed as best she could. Morris returned with a simple calico dress that had belonged to his late wife. "She was about your size," he said, his voice gentle with memory. "Would want it put to good use." Grateful, Zara changed into the clean dress after Morris left. It felt like a luxury after weeks in the same clothes. She brushed out her long hair with a borrowed brush, wincing at the tangles, then braided it for sleep. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow in coming. The events of the day replayed in her mind the terrifying confrontation in the mountain pass, Matthew's timely appearance, the ride to Hill City. She thought of the way he'd handled his rifle with such confidence, the steady presence of his back against her chest as they rode. There was something about Matthew Farley that made her feel safe for the first time since Samuel Hollister's murder. It wasn't just his skill with weapons or his Pinkerton credentials, it was something in those storm-gray eyes, a sense of unwavering justice that matched her own. She finally drifted off to sleep with the reassuring thought that she was no longer facing her troubles alone. The first pale light of dawn was filtering through the small window when Zara awoke to urgent voices below. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find Matthew and Morris in intense conversation. "What's happened?" she asked. Both men turned, their expressions grim. "The bounty hunters," Matthew explained. "They're in town. Someone must have seen us arrive last night," Morris nodded. "My typesetter just brought word. They're at the saloon asking questions about a man and woman who rode in late. How long do we have?" Zara asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Not long," Matthew replied. "They'll work their way here eventually." "I've got the horses ready out back," Morris said, "and some provisions. You should be able to reach Deadwood by tomorrow afternoon if you push hard." Matthew gathered his rifle and saddlebags. "We need to move now." Morris handed him a sealed envelope. "Give this to Marshal Taylor in Deadwood. It contains everything I've gathered, plus a signed affidavit about what I know of the judge's dealings." Matthew tucked the envelope securely inside his jacket. "This could put a target on your back, old friend," Morris smiled grimly. "Already got one, may as well make it worth something." He turned to Zara. "Good luck, Miss Dalton. I believe your story for what it's worth." "That means more than you know," she replied. They slipped out the back door of the newspaper office as the town was just beginning to stir. 2 fresh horses were waiting, saddled and ready. "Can you ride on your own?" Matthew asked as he checked the saddle on the bay mare that would be Zara's mount. "I grew up on a ranch in Colorado," she replied with a hint of pride. "I could ride before I could walk." His eyes crinkled with approval. "Good, we'll need to move fast." They mounted quickly and rode out of town via back alleys, avoiding the main street where the bounty hunters might be. Once clear of the buildings, they urged their horses to a gallop across the open countryside, heading northeast toward Deadwood. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding forests. Under different circumstances, Zara might have enjoyed the ride through the beautiful Black Hills landscape. But the knowledge that armed men were pursuing them kept her alert to every sound, every movement in the trees they passed. They rode steadily for hours, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat some of the jerky and biscuits Morris had packed for them. Matthew remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning their backtrail for signs of pursuit. "You think we've lost them?" Zara asked during one such break as they shared a canteen of water. Matthew shook his head. "Those men are experienced trackers. They'll follow our trail, though we've got a good head start now. What if the marshal doesn't believe us?" The question had been weighing on her mind. "Jim Taylor's a good man. More importantly, he can't be bought." Matthew corked the canteen and secured it to his saddle. "And he's no friend to corrupt judges." As they prepared to mount up again, Matthew suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to his rifle. "What is it?" Zara whispered, following his gaze. "Dust cloud about 2 miles back." His voice was calm, but his expression was serious. 3 riders moving fast. Zara's heart sank. "The bounty hunters. They must have picked up our trail faster than I expected." He helped her into the saddle. "We need to find a place where we can lose them or make a stand." They rode hard, pushing their horses to the limit. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they entered a heavily forested area, the trail narrowing between towering pines. "There's a river ahead," Matthew called over his shoulder. "If we can cross it and head upstream, we might be able to throw them off." But as they rounded a bend in the trail, they pulled up short. A massive tree had fallen across the path, blocking their route completely. "This is fresh," Matthew said, dismounting to examine the trunk. "No more than an hour old. Could it be natural?" Zara asked, though she already suspected the answer. Matthew pointed to marks on the wood. "Axe cuts. Someone didn't want anyone coming this way." He looked around warily. "Or wanted to make sure we couldn't." A chill ran down Zara's spine. "You think they got ahead of us somehow?" "Maybe not the same men, but Hollister has allies all through these hills." He helped her dismount. "We'll have to go around. There's no time to clear the path." They led their horses off the trail, picking their way carefully through the dense underbrush. The going was much slower now, and Zara could sense Matthew's growing tension. "The dust cloud's getting closer," he said after a while, looking back through the trees. "We need to find that river." They pushed on through the forest, branches scratching at their faces and clothes. Finally, they heard the sound of rushing water ahead. "There." Zara pointed between the trees where sunlight sparkled off moving water. They hurried forward, but just as they reached the riverbank, a shot rang out from the forest behind them. The bullet splintered bark from a tree just inches from Matthew's head. "Down," he shouted, pulling Zara behind a fallen log as more shots followed. "How many?" she gasped, her heart hammering. Matthew peered carefully over their cover. "Can't tell, at least 2, maybe all 3. He checked his Winchester. "We need to cross that river." The water looked swift and deep, at least 30 feet across. On the other side, the bank rose steeply, offering better cover than their current position. "Can you swim?" Matthew asked. Zara nodded. "But the horses, will have to leave them." He grimaced at the thought. "Better to lose the horses than our lives." Another volley of shots peppered their position. Matthew returned fire, aiming at muzzle flashes among the trees. "Go," he urged Zara. "Cross while I cover you." "I'll be right behind." Zara hesitated, reluctant to leave him. "Promise me." His eyes met hers, intense and determined. "I promise." Taking a deep breath, Zara slipped down the bank and into the cold water. The current immediately tugged at her skirts, threatening to pull her under. She fought against it, striking out for the opposite shore with strong, desperate strokes. Behind her, Matthew's rifle cracked repeatedly as he provided covering fire. The cold water numbed her limbs, but fear and determination kept her moving. Finally, her feet found purchase on the rocky riverbed, and she dragged herself up the far bank, gasping for breath. Turning, she saw Matthew backing toward the river, still firing at their pursuers. "Matthew, hurry!" He fired once more, then turned and plunged into the water. As he swam, a figure emerged from the trees on the bank he'd left the lead bounty hunter, his face contorted with anger. He raised his rifle, taking careful aim at Matthew's swimming form. Without thinking, Zara snatched up a rock and hurled it with all her strength. It fell short of the hunter, but the splash distracted him just enough to spoil his aim. His shot went wide, and by then, Matthew had reached the middle of the river. The hunter cursed and fired again, this time striking the water dangerously close to Matthew. But before he could get off another shot, Matthew reached the far bank, and Zara helped pull him up beside her. "Run," he gasped, water streaming from his clothes. They scrambled up the steep embankment, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. At the top, dense forest offered them cover once more, and they plunged into it, running as fast as their sodden clothes would allow. "They'll have to find a place to cross," Matthew said between breaths as they put distance between themselves and the river. "That buys us some time." "But we've lost the horses and our supplies," Zara pointed out, trying to wring water from her skirt as they moved. "And Deadwood's still a day away on foot." "There's a line shack about 5 miles from here," Matthew said, "used by hunters and trappers. If we can reach it by nightfall, we'll have shelter at least." They pushed on through the forest as the afternoon waned, the wet clothes chilling them as the temperature dropped. Zara's dress, heavy with water and mud, hampered her movements, and she tore away the bottom few inches to make walking easier. Matthew noticed her shivering. "Here," he said, shrugging out of his buckskin jacket. "It's wet, but it'll still help against the wind." "You need it too," she protested. "I'm used to rough conditions," he insisted, draping it over her shoulders. The jacket was indeed soaked, but it blocked the increasingly cold breeze, and it carried his scent leather, gunpowder, and something uniquely him that Zara found oddly comforting. As dusk approached, they finally reached the line shack Matthew had mentioned. It was little more than a one-room cabin with a sod roof, but to Zara it looked like a palace. Matthew approached cautiously, rifle ready, but the shack was empty. Inside, they found a small cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 stools and a narrow cot against one wall. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Matthew said with a wry smile, "but it'll keep us alive." "It's perfect," Zara replied sincerely. Matthew checked the supply shelf and found matches, some salt, coffee, and a few cans of beans left by previous occupants. Outside, he gathered firewood while Zara attempted to dry their clothes as best she could. Soon, a fire crackled in the stove, casting a warm glow throughout the small cabin. They hung their outer garments near the heat to dry, leaving Zara in her chemise and petticoat and Matthew in his union suit, both of them too cold and exhausted to be concerned with propriety. Matthew heated a can of beans and they ate in grateful silence, sharing a tin cup of strong black coffee afterward. The hot food and drink revived them both, and some color returned to Zara's pale cheeks. "You think they'll find us here?" she asked, staring into the flames visible through the stove's grate. Matthew considered before answering. "They'll keep looking, but they don't know about this place specifically. By morning, our trail will be harder to follow. If we leave at first light, we can still reach Deadwood by tomorrow night." Zara nodded, then looked at the single narrow cot. "You should take the bed, you've done all the fighting." Matthew shook his head. "I'll manage on the floor, got my bedroll dried out enough." They fell silent again, listening to the wind picking up outside and the occasional pop of the fire. Despite the danger still pursuing them, Zara felt a strange sense of peace in the small cabin with this man she barely knew yet trusted implicitly. "How did you become a Pinkerton?" she asked after a while. Matthew leaned back against the wall, stretching his long legs toward the stove. "After the war, I fought for the Union. I joined the Texas Rangers for a spell. Did that for 5 years until I got shot up pretty bad chasing cattle rustlers." He touched his side absently, and Zara noticed a scar visible through his partially unbuttoned Union suit. "While I was recovering, a Pinkerton agent came through investigating a counterfeiting ring. I helped him out, and he offered me a job." "You must have seen a lot of the country," Zara said, trying not to stare at the scar or the broad expanse of chest it marked. "Too much of it sometimes." He smiled faintly. "What about you? How does a Colorado rancher's daughter end up working for Samuel Hollister?" Zara sighed, memories washing over her. "My father died 2 years ago. The ranch had debts I couldn't pay, so I lost it. I came to Dakota Territory looking for work and found a position as housekeeper in the Hollister home. Samuel treated you well." There was a careful neutrality in Matthew's tone. "He was kind," Zara confirmed. "A quiet man, bookish, not at all like his brother the judge. Samuel spent most evenings in his study with ledgers and papers." She paused, the painful memory surfacing. "That's where I found him that night, slumped over his desk with a bullet in his back." Matthew nodded slowly, and the judge arrived suspiciously quickly. "Within minutes," Zara agreed, almost as if he knew exactly when to appear. "He probably did," Matthew said grimly. "From what I've pieced together, the judge had his brother killed when he discovered Samuel was gathering evidence against him. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, a convenient scapegoat with no family to defend you." "Why are you so determined to help me?" Zara asked suddenly. "Even if you suspected I was innocent, most men wouldn't risk their lives for a stranger." Matthew was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than before. 3 years ago, my sister was accused of stealing from the general store where she worked in Cheyenne. The owner was a powerful man in town, friends with the mayor and sheriff. Turned out he was forcing himself on female employees, and my sister threatened to expose him." His jaw tightened. "They railroaded her, 6 months in prison. She took her own life 2 weeks after they locked her up." "Oh, Matthew," Zara whispered, her heart aching for him, "I'm so sorry." I couldn't save her, he said, his eyes fixed on the glowing stove. But when I saw you in that mountain pass, outnumbered and facing the same kind of injustice, I guess I saw a chance to make something right. Impulsively, Zara moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in hers. His fingers were calloused but gentle as they closed around her smaller ones. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. Their eyes met in the dim light of the cabin, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a moment, Zara thought he might lean closer, but then the wind howled particularly fiercely outside, breaking the spell. Matthew cleared his throat and stood, moving to check that the door was securely barred. "We should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." Zara reluctantly retreated to the cot, wrapping herself in the rough blanket while Matthew made a pallet on the floor nearby. "Good night, Matthew," she said as he extinguished the lamp, leaving only the red glow from the stove to illuminate the cabin. "Good night, Zara," he replied, his voice a comforting rumble in the darkness. Despite her exhaustion, Zara lay awake for some time, listening to Matthew's steady breathing and the wind rattling the cabin's single window. Her mind replayed their conversations, his revelation about his sister, the way his hand had felt holding hers. There was something growing between them, something she hadn't expected to find while running for her life. With that thought warming her more effectively than the stove, she finally drifted into sleep. She awoke to gray dawn light filtering through the cabin window and the smell of coffee brewing. Matthew stood at the stove, fully dressed in his now dry clothes, his back to her as he stirred something in a small pot. "Morning," he said without turning, somehow sensing she was awake. "Hope you like beans for breakfast." Zara sat up, smoothing her tangled hair. "After yesterday, I'd eat tree bark if it was hot." That earned her a chuckle as he scooped beans onto a tin plate for her. "Your dress is dry, a bit worse for wear, but it'll do until we reach Deadwood." She dressed quickly behind the privacy of a blanket he respectfully hung across a corner of the cabin. When she emerged, he was studying a small map he'd pulled from his saddlebag. "If we follow this ridge," he said, tracing a line with his finger, "we'll avoid the main trails where they might be watching. It's rougher going, but safer." They ate quickly, then packed what few supplies remained. Outside, the morning was clear but cold, their breath visible in the autumn air. "No sign they found our trail," Matthew observed, examining the ground around the cabin, "but we should move quickly all the same." They set off through the forest, following the ridgeline as Matthew had suggested. Without horses, the journey was slow and arduous, but they maintained a steady pace. Zara's ranch upbringing served her well. She matched Matthew stride for stride, never complaining despite the difficult terrain. By midday, they had covered several miles. They paused in a small clearing to rest and share the last of their jerky. "Tell me about your ranch in Colorado," Matthew said as they sat on fallen logs. "I've ridden through that territory, beautiful country." Zara's face softened with memory. "It was Pine Valley Ranch, about 40 miles west of Denver. My father built it from nothing. We ran cattle mostly, some horses." She twisted a strand of hair around her finger. "I miss it every day. What happened after your father died? The winter of '76 was brutal. We lost nearly half the herd to the cold and wolves. Pa had taken loans to expand, and when he died, the bank wasn't interested in giving a woman time to make good on them." Her voice took on a bitter edge. "They foreclosed within 3 months. I couldn't even afford to keep Pa's grave marked properly." Matthew's expression darkened. "Banks don't much care who they hurt long as their ledgers balance." "No, they don't." Zara straightened her shoulders. "But I was determined to start fresh. That's why I came to Dakota. The Black Hills gold rush meant opportunities even for a woman alone." "And now?" Matthew asked. "If we clear your name, what then?" The question caught Zara off guard. She hadn't allowed herself to think beyond surviving each day. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've got nothing to go back to in Colorado, and after everything that's happened here—" "You could go anywhere," Matthew suggested. "California maybe, or up to Montana Territory." "What about you?" she countered. "After Hollister is brought to justice, where does a Pinkerton agent go?" His eyes met hers. Wherever the next case takes me, I suppose. Something like disappointment flickered in Zara's chest at his answer, though she couldn't say why. They'd known each other barely 2 days, yet already the thought of him riding away once this was over left an unexpected hollow feeling. Before she could examine the sensation further, Matthew suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to his rifle. "What is it?" she whispered. "Listen," he murmured. Zara held her breath. At first she heard nothing but the normal sounds of the forest wind in the trees, birds calling. Then she caught the faint but distinctive sound of horses moving through underbrush, not far away. "Could be anyone," she said hopefully. Matthew shook his head. 3 riders moving careful like they're tracking, not likely to be innocent travelers. He rose silently, helping Zara to her feet. "Stay low, move quietly," he instructed in a whisper. "There's a rockier area ahead where we might lose them." They crept forward through the trees, every snap of a twig sounding thunderous to Zara's anxious ears. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, then suddenly seemed to fade. "They've lost our trail," Matthew whispered, relief evident in his voice. The rocky ground worked. They continued forward more confidently, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. The forest began to thin as they climbed higher, offering occasional glimpses of the vast landscape spreading out below them. "See that?" Matthew pointed to a cluster of buildings visible in the distance, nestled in a valley. "That's Deadwood. We'll be there before sundown." Hope surged in Zara's heart. They were going to make it. Soon they would reach the federal marshal, present their evidence, and her name would be cleared, but life in the West rarely rewarded optimism. As they rounded a bend in the trail, they found themselves face to face with the thin, scar-faced bounty hunter. "Well, ain't this convenient," he drawled, his revolver already drawn. "Been chasing you two all over these damn hills." Matthew pushed Zara behind him, his rifle half raised. "Where are your friends?" he asked, eyes scanning the surroundings. The hunter grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Split up to cover more ground. Lucky for me I guessed right about where you'd be heading." He gestured with his gun. "Drop the rifle, Pinkerton man." Matthew remained still. "You know I can't do that. Then I'll just shoot you both and claim self-defense." The hunter cocked his revolver. "Judge won't care how you died, long as he gets his revenge on the girl." Time seemed to slow. Zara saw Matthew's muscles tense, preparing to dive for cover or return fire. But they both knew he couldn't move fast enough to avoid the bounty hunter's bullet at this range. The crack of a gunshot shattered the tense silence. But it was the bounty hunter who jerked backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as a red stain blossomed on his chest. He crumpled to the ground, his unfired revolver falling from limp fingers. Matthew whirled, pushing Zara down as he sought the source of the shot. From the trees emerged a tall figure leading a horse, a smoking rifle in his hands. "Looked like you could use some help," said the stranger, a badge glinting on his chest as he approached. "Marshal Taylor?" Matthew asked incredulously. The man nodded, lowering his rifle. "Morris Peterson sent a telegraph yesterday saying you were heading my way with evidence against Judge Hollister. When word came that bounty hunters were tracking a man and woman through the hills, I figured I'd ride out to meet you." Relief washed over Zara like a cool wave. "You believe we're innocent?" Marshal Taylor studied her for a moment. "Morris vouched for you both, and that's good enough for me. Besides, I've had my eye on Judge Hollister for some time, just never had enough evidence to move against him." "We have it now," Matthew said, patting the inside pocket of his jacket where Morris's envelope remained secure. "Then let's get you both to Deadwood," the marshal said. "I've got a spare horse you can use." As they mounted Zara sharing the marshal's horse, while Matthew took the spare, she felt a profound sense of relief. The nightmare that had begun in the judge's study weeks ago might finally be nearing its end. The ride to Deadwood passed without incident, the remaining bounty hunters either unaware of their location or unwilling to challenge a federal marshal. As they approached the bustling mining town with its crowded main street and haphazard buildings climbing the hillsides, Zara felt both apprehension and hope. "We'll go directly to my office," Marshal Taylor told them. "It's safer there while we sort this out." The marshal's office was a solid stone building near the center of town, with barred windows and a heavy oak door. Inside, a deputy looked up in surprise as they entered. "Jenkins, this is Matthew Farley from the Pinkerton agency and Miss Zara Dalton," the marshal introduced them. "They're under my protection. No one comes in to see them without my say-so." The deputy nodded, though his eyes widened at Zara's name. "The wanted woman from the posters. The falsely accused woman," Marshal Taylor corrected firmly. "We're about to find out just how false those charges are." They gathered around the marshal's desk as Matthew produced the envelope from Morris, along with his own notes and evidence. For the next hour, they laid out the case against Judge Hollister, the land fraud scheme, the suspicious timing of his brother's murder, the railroading of Zara as a convenient scapegoat. "This is compelling," Marshal Taylor said finally, studying the bank records that showed large deposits to the judge's account immediately after disputed land sales. "Combined with witness statements from Morris and others, we have enough to arrest him." "He won't come quietly," Matthew warned. The marshal nodded grimly. "Men like Hollister never do, but he's not above the law no matter what he thinks." He turned to Zara. "Miss Dalton, I'll need a full statement from you about the night of the murder. Every detail you can remember." Zara spent the next hour reliving that terrible night, describing how she'd found Samuel slumped over his desk, the position of the body, the location of the wound, the items disturbed in the study. As painful as the memories were, she forced herself to be precise, knowing her testimony would be crucial. "One thing's been bothering me," she said as she concluded her statement. "The study window was open when I found him, though it was a cold night. Samuel never would have worked with the window open. He was always complaining about drafts." Matthew and the marshal exchanged significant looks. "The killer's entry point," Matthew suggested, "and exit," the marshal agreed. "Which means it couldn't have been Miss Dalton, who had legitimate access to the house." "Will that be enough?" Zara asked, "combined with everything else?" "Yes," the marshal stood. "I'll send telegraphs tonight to request warrants." By this time tomorrow, Judge Hollister will be the one facing justice. Night had fallen by the time they finished. The marshal arranged for Zara to stay in a small but respectable boarding house run by a widow he trusted, while Matthew took a room at the hotel across the street. "I've posted Jenkins outside your door," the marshal told Zara as he escorted her to the boarding house. "Just as a precaution." "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for everything. Just doing my job, Miss Dalton." He tipped his hat and left her at the door of the boarding house, the widow Mrs. Holcomb welcomed Zara warmly despite the late hour. "Any friend of the marshal's is welcome here," she said, showing Zara to a clean, simply furnished room. "There's hot water for washing, and I'll bring you up some supper." Left alone, Zara sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The past few days felt like a lifetime: the terror in the mountain pass, Matthew's timely rescue, their harrowing journey to Deadwood, and now, finally, the possibility of justice. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Matthew standing there, hat in hand. "I wanted to make sure you were settled and all right," he said. "Come in," she invited, suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. He stepped inside but remained near the door, maintaining a respectful distance. "Marshal Taylor is confident the warrants will come through by morning. He's already organizing a posse to ride to the judge's county." "Will you go with them?" Zara asked. Matthew nodded. "I need to see this through." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like you to stay here where it's safe." Zara wanted to protest but knew he was right. "What happens after, to me, I mean? Once Hollister is arrested, the charges against you will be dropped. You'll be free to go wherever you choose." There was something in his tone, a question unasked. "I still don't know where that will be," Zara admitted. "Everything's happened so fast." Matthew took a step closer. "Zara, Another knock interrupted him. Mrs. Holcomb entered with a tray of food, her cheerful presence filling the small room. "Here you are, dear, some stew and biscuits. Oh, Mr. Farley, I didn't realize you were here. Shall I bring another plate?" "No, thank you, madam," Matthew replied politely. "I was just leaving." He turned back to Zara. "Get some rest. I'll see you in the morning before we ride out." After he'd gone, Zara ate mechanically, her mind too full for her to truly taste the food. What had Matthew been about to say? And why did it suddenly matter so much? She slept fitfully that night, her dreams filled with chasing figures and mountain passes. She awoke at dawn, feeling less rested than she'd hoped. After washing and dressing in the same worn dress, now showing the effects of their journey, she went downstairs to find Matthew and Marshall Taylor already in Mrs. Holcomb's parlor. "The warrants came through," the marshal announced without preamble. "We ride in an hour, 6 men including your Mr. Farley and myself." "He's not my," Zara began, then stopped, flushing. Matthew's eyes met hers, a hint of amusement lightening his serious expression. "We expect to reach the judge's county by nightfall," he explained. "With luck, we'll have him in custody before he knows we're coming." "And if not?" Zara asked, hearing the worry in her own voice. "Then things get more interesting," Marshal Taylor said grimly. "But we'll bring him in one way or another." After the marshal excused himself to make final preparations, Matthew lingered. "I wanted a moment alone with you before we left," he said, his voice low. "I'm worried," Zara admitted. "Hollister won't give up easily. He's killed once already." "We'll be careful," Matthew promised. "The marshal knows what he's doing, still." Zara stepped closer, her hand reaching for his almost of its own accord. "Please come back safely." Matthew's fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. "I will, and when this is over." He paused, seeming to search for words. "When this is over," Zara prompted softly, "when this is over, maybe we could talk about what comes next, for both of us." His eyes held hers, conveying more than his careful words. Zara's heart quickened. "I'd like that." For a moment they stood there, connected by more than just their clasped hands. Then the sound of horses outside broke the spell. "That'll be the posse," Matthew said reluctantly. "I have to go." Impulsively, Zara rose on tiptoes and pressed a kiss to his cheek. "For luck," she whispered. His eyes darkened, and for a breath she thought he might pull her closer. Instead, he squeezed her hand once more before releasing it. "Wait for me," he said simply, and then he was gone. The hours after their departure were among the longest of Zara's life. Mrs. Holcomb tried to distract her with household tasks and conversation, but Zara's thoughts remained with the posse riding toward a confrontation with the man who had destroyed her life and now threatened Matthew's. That evening, unable to settle, she sat on the small porch of the boarding house watching the street. Deputy Jenkins remained at his post nearby, offering reassuring nods whenever their eyes met. "They'll be fine, Miss Dalton," he said at one point. "Marshal Taylor's the best there is, and your Pinkerton man looks like he can handle himself." "He's not my," Zara began automatically, then smiled ruefully. "Yes, they're both very capable." As darkness fell, Mrs. Holcomb convinced her to come inside. "You'll catch your death out here," she fussed. "Besides, they won't be back before tomorrow at the earliest." Zara knew she was right, but sleep eluded her once again. She lay awake, imagining the posse's progress, the confrontation to come, all the things that could go wrong. And beneath those immediate concerns, questions about her own future tumbled through her mind. What had Matthew meant about what comes next for both of us? Was he suggesting? But no, that was foolish. They barely knew each other. And yet, in the intensity of their shared experiences, something had grown between them, a connection, a trust, perhaps something more. She must have dozed eventually, for she awoke to bright sunlight and the sound of hoofbeats in the street below. Rushing to the window, she saw riders approaching the posse returning, with an additional horse bearing a man whose hands were bound to his saddle horn. Judge Hollister. Zara dressed hastily and hurried downstairs, nearly colliding with Mrs. Holcomb in the hallway. "They're back," the widow exclaimed. "And they've got him?" Together they went to the porch, where they had a clear view of the procession making its way to the marshal's office. Marshal Taylor led the group, his face grim but satisfied. Behind him rode the posse members, dust-covered and weary. In their midst was Judge Hollister, a once imposing figure now diminished by captivity, his fine clothes dirty and torn, his face a mask of fury. And there, riding just behind the judge, was Matthew. His clothes were dusty, and she could see a bandage wrapped around his left forearm, but he was alive and upright in the saddle. As if sensing her presence, he looked up as they passed the boarding house. Their eyes met, and the smile he gave her sent warmth flooding through her chest. "Go on, Mrs." Holcomb urged, giving Zara a gentle push. "He'll want to see you properly." Zara hurried down the steps and along the boardwalk toward the marshal's office. By the time she arrived, they were dismounting, deputies taking charge of the judge. "You'll hang for this." Hollister was shouting as they led him inside. "Do you know who I am? I have friends in the territorial government. Save it for the judge at your trial," Marshal Taylor replied coolly. A real judge this time. As the door closed on Hollister's continuing protests, Matthew turned and saw Zara. The weariness in his face gave way to something warmer as he crossed to her. "You're hurt," she said, gesturing to his bandaged arm. "Just a graze," he assured her. "The judge had supporters. They put up a fight." "Tell me what happened," Zara urged. Matthew led her to a bench outside the office. "We reached the county seat just after sundown. The marshal had telegraphed ahead to the county sheriff one he knew wasn't in Hollister's pocket. Together we surrounded the judge's house." He rubbed a hand over his stubbled jaw. He knew something was wrong. "Had 4 armed men with him, ready for trouble." "A gunfight?" Zara asked, her throat tight with belated fear. Matthew nodded. "Brief but intense. 2 of his men were wounded, 1 killed. Jenkins took a bullet in the shoulder." He touched his own bandage. "I got this when we finally breached the house." And the judge himself, a grim smile, tried to escape out the back. The marshal caught him trying to saddle a horse. Apparently, his honor isn't much of a fighter when faced with real opposition. Marshal Taylor emerged from his office then, looking tired but satisfied. "Miss Dalton," he acknowledged with a nod. "I thought you'd like to know that Judge Hollister has been formally charged with the murder of his brother, corruption, land fraud, and conspiracy to pervert the course of justice." "What about the charges against me?" Zara asked. "Dropped," the marshal said firmly. "I've already sent telegraphs to that effect. By this time tomorrow, every lawman in the territory will know you're an innocent woman." The relief that washed over Zara was so intense she had to sit down again. "I can hardly believe it's over." "Believe it," Matthew said, taking her hand. "You're free," the marshal cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. We found documentation in the judge's house, a safe behind a painting in his study. Among the papers was his brother's will." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. "Samuel Hollister left his personal property to you, Miss Dalton. Seems he considered you the only person he could trust." Zara accepted the document with trembling hands. I had no idea." "The property isn't extensive," the marshal cautioned. "A small house in town, some personal effects, a modest bank account, but it's legally yours now." "Thank you," Zara said, fighting back tears, "for everything you've done." The marshal tipped his hat. "Just setting things right, madam." "Now if you'll excuse me, I have a prisoner to process and a report to write." After he'd gone, Zara and Matthew sat in silence for a moment, the enormity of what had happened settling around them. "What will you do now?" Matthew asked finally. "Will you claim Samuel's house?" Zara looked down at the will in her hands. "I don't know, there are memories there I'm not sure I want to face." She looked up at him. "What about you? Will you return to your Pinkerton work?" "Actually," Matthew said, shifting to face her more directly, "I've been thinking about that. The agency offered me a new assignment in Denver. They're opening an office there, want someone who knows the Western Territories." "Denver," Zara repeated, something like hope fluttering in her chest. "That's not far from my old home." "No, it isn't," Matthew agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "I was thinking, well, with Samuel's inheritance, you might have options now. You could start fresh anywhere." "Including Colorado," Zara suggested softly. "Including Colorado." Matthew took both her hands in his. "Zara, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past few days. I've never met anyone like you, your courage, your determination, your heart." "Matthew, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance for us to see if what I feel, what I hope you feel too, is real." Zara's heart seemed to expand in her chest, filling with a warmth that spread through her entire body. "I do feel it," she whispered. "I've felt it since you appeared above that mountain pass with your rifle." Matthew's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a kiss that was both gentle and full of promise. Zara responded without hesitation, her hands moving to his shoulders, then sliding up to touch his face. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes to Denver to us?" Zara smiled, happier than she'd been in longer than she could remember. "Yes to Denver, to us, to whatever comes next, yes to all of it." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Judge Hollister's trial was swift by frontier standards, the evidence against him overwhelming. He was convicted of his brother's murder and sentenced to hang, though he maintained his innocence to the end. With her name cleared and Samuel's modest inheritance in hand, Zara made preparations to leave Dakota Territory. She sold the small house he had left her, preferring to make a completely fresh start. Matthew resigned his position with the Dakota office of the Pinkerton agency and accepted the Denver assignment, with the understanding that he would begin in 1 month's time, enough for them to travel to Colorado and settle in. They were married in Deadwood 3 weeks after the judge's conviction, a simple ceremony with Marshall Taylor giving the bride away and Morris Peterson, who had journeyed from Hill City for the occasion, serving as Matthew's best man. Mrs. Holcomb provided a wedding breakfast afterward, her boarding house parlor decorated with wildflowers for the occasion. "To think," Morris mused as they enjoyed the celebration, "if those bounty hunters hadn't cornered you in that mountain pass, and if Matt hadn't been tracking the judge's activities in the same area." "Providence," Mrs. Holcomb declared firmly. "Some things are just meant to be." Zara, radiant in a new blue dress that Matthew had insisted on buying her, squeezed her husband's hand. "I think she's right." The journey to Denver took them through the sweeping landscapes of Wyoming Territory and into the foothills of the Colorado Rockies. As they approached the growing city with Pikes Peak visible in the distance, Zara felt a sense of homecoming she hadn't expected. "We could look at properties outside the city," Matthew suggested as they rode. "Something with a bit of land, maybe, not a full ranch, but enough for a few horses." "I'd like that," Zara agreed. The thought of having a home again, a real home, with Matthew filled her with joy. They found a small but promising property 10 miles west of Denver, a modest house with a barn and 20 acres of land that backed up to a clear running creek. The previous owner, an elderly widower returning east to live with his daughter, was pleased to sell to the young couple, especially when he learned Zara had ranching experience. "Place needs a woman's touch," he told them as they completed the sale, "and someone who knows how to make things grow." As summer turned to fall, they settled into their new home and new life together. Matthew began his work with the Denver Pinkerton office, quickly establishing himself as one of their most valuable agents. Zara, meanwhile, turned her attention to making their house a home and starting a small horse breeding operation with 2 quality mares Matthew had helped her select. They often spoke of their extraordinary meeting that moment when Matthew had appeared above the mountain pass like an avenging angel, rifle in hand. Sometimes they marveled at the string of events that had brought them together, the unlikely confluence of circumstance and timing. "If I'd been 5 minutes later reaching that pass," Matthew would say, shaking his head in wonder. "If I'd taken a different trail when I ran," Zara would counter. But they hadn't, and now their lives were inextricably bound together, their futures as intertwined as their hands when they sat together on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. On a crisp October day, almost exactly 1 year after their first meeting, Matthew returned from town with a letter bearing the Deadwood postmark. "From Marshall Taylor," he explained as he handed it to Zara. She opened it eagerly, reading aloud for both of them. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Farley, I hope this letter finds you well in your new home. Deadwood continues much as you left it, though perhaps a bit more orderly these days. I thought you might like to know that the last of Judge Hollister's corrupt associates has been convicted. The territorial governor has appointed a new judge for the county, a man of impeccable character who studied law back east. More personally, I wanted to inform you that I visited Samuel Hollister's grave last Sunday and found it well maintained with fresh flowers. It seems the townspeople have not forgotten him or his unfortunate end. I think you would be pleased to know that justice was ultimately done, and that you, Miss Zara, forgive me, Mrs. Farley, have found happiness. Morris Peterson sends his regards as well. His newspaper continues to thrive, and he has become something of a crusader for justice in the region. He credits your case with reminding him of the power of the press to right wrongs. Should your travels ever bring you back to Dakota Territory, you would be most welcome guests in my home. With warmest regards, James Taylor. Federal Marshal. Zara folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table beside her. A good man, Matthew said, his arm around her shoulders. Yes, she agreed, we were fortunate in our friends. Matthew kissed her temple, and in finding each other. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the stars emerge above the mountains, Zara rested her head on Matthew's shoulder, a contentment she had once thought lost to her forever filling her heart. I have something to tell you, she said softly. Matthew turned to look at her, his eyes questioning. I saw Dr. Linden in town yesterday, she continued, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now. We're going to have a baby in the spring. Matthew's face transformed with wonder and joy. A baby, you're sure? Zara nodded, her own happiness mirrored in his expression. Quite sure. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. A family, he whispered against her hair. Our family. As winter gave way to spring, their home flourished. The mares Zara had purchased produced fine foals that promised to be the foundation of a successful breeding program. Matthew's reputation with the Pinkerton agency grew, allowing him to be more selective about his assignments and spend more time at home. And Zara's belly swelled with their growing child, a tangible symbol of their love and future. On a perfect May morning in 1880, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows around their home, Zara gave birth to a son they named Samuel James, Farley honoring both the man whose death had inadvertently brought them together and the marshal who had helped them find justice. As Matthew held his son for the first time, looking down at the tiny face with its shock of dark hair, he felt a completion he had never known was possible. He's perfect, he whispered, carefully returning the baby to Zara's waiting arms. He is, she agreed, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. Our miracle. Over the years that followed, their family and their homestead grew together. A daughter, Elizabeth Rose, joined them 2 years after Samuel. Their horse breeding business flourished, with Farley horses becoming known throughout Colorado Territory for their quality and temperament. Matthew continued his work with the Pinkertons, but arranged his schedule to be home more than away, unwilling to miss his children growing up or to be long parted from Zara. Occasionally, they would receive letters or visitors from their Dakota Days Marshal Taylor passing through Denver on official business. Morris Peterson visiting to interview Matthew for a series on frontier justice. Each time, they would retell the story of their meeting in the mountain pass, the tale gaining a patina of legend with each telling. On their 10th anniversary, Matthew surprised Zara with a special gift, the deed to her father's old ranch in Pine Valley, which he had quietly tracked down and purchased from the bank that had foreclosed on it years before. It's not the same buildings, he cautioned as he handed her the papers. The original house burned down some years back, but it's the same land, the same valley your father loved. Tears filled Zara's eyes as she studied the deed. Matthew, how did you even find it? I'm a detective, remember, he said with a smile. Finding things is what I do. They visited the property the following month. Matthew, Zara, 12-year-old Samuel, and 10-year-old Elizabeth. The old ranch house was indeed gone, replaced by a smaller cabin used occasionally by the caretaker Matthew had hired to watch over the place. But the land, the beautiful valley with its creek and pine forests, the pastures where her father's cattle had grazed, remained unchanged. What will we do with it? Zara asked as they stood on a rise overlooking the valley, the children exploring the creek below. "Whatever you want," Matthew replied, his arm around her waist. "We could build a new house, expand our horse operation here, or just keep it as a place to visit to connect with your past." Zara leaned against him, watching their children playing in the same creek where she had played as a girl. "I think I'd like to build here," she said finally. "Not to leave our home, but to have this too a place for the children to know where their mother came from," and so they did. Over the next 2 years, they built a second home in Pine Valley, a comfortable ranch house on the foundation of the original. They split their time between their two properties, breeding horses at both, creating a life richer than either had imagined possible on that fateful day in the mountain pass. On a golden autumn afternoon in 1893, Matthew and Zara sat on the porch of their Pine Valley home, watching their grandchildren Samuel's 2 young boys playing with a new foal in the corral. Elizabeth, now 23 and recently married to a young doctor from Denver, sat nearby, working on a quilt for her own first child due in the winter. "Did I ever tell you," Matthew said, taking Zara's hand in his, "that the day I found you in that pass, I almost took a different route entirely?" Zara smiled, the fine lines around her eyes crinkling with the familiar expression. "Only about 100 times. Well, it bears repeating," he insisted. "I was tracking those bounty hunters, but I nearly followed a false trail west. Something instinct, luck, providence, whatever you want to call it, made me turn east instead. And there I was," Zara finished, cornered and desperate. "And there you were," Matthew agreed, lifting her hand to kiss it. "The most beautiful, desperate woman I'd ever seen." Zara laughed, the sound as bright and clear as it had been when they first met. "Charmer. 15 years later, and I still mean every word," he said, his eyes still the color of a summer storm though now framed by silver hair at the temples, holding hers with the same intensity they always had. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Even with all the shooting and running for our lives," she teased. "Especially with all that," he replied with a grin. "Made life interesting, didn't it?" As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley her father had loved and that now belonged to her family again, Zara reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of that mountain pass to the peace of this porch, from a woman alone and falsely accused to the center of a loving family, from hopelessness to abundant joy, it had all begun with the crack of a rifle and a stranger's voice promising protection. "I love you, Matthew Farley," she said simply, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Every day I love you more, and I love you, Zara Farley," he replied, his arm tightening around her. "Always have, always will." Together they watched the sunset paint the Colorado sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, the same sun that had silhouetted Matthew against the Dakota sky on the day their story began, the day the bounty hunters had cornered her in the mountain pass, and a cowboy had appeared above them with his rifle, the first page of a love story still being written after all these years.